So just a little background on that, the story from earlier. It's just so sweet and so cool. So a couple of weeks ago, we had noticed little Aria at the end of a service asking where the tithing box was because she had her dollar that she wanted to put in it. And she brought it from home. And then it was great because the next week she was telling Matt. Matt caught her doing this and said, "Hey, what are you doing, Aria?" And so sure enough, she had her dollar, but she felt like her bill wouldn't fit through the slot. And so she actually brought some coins so she could shove her bill down into the slot. And so she was very nervous to come up and share that story. But it was just such a sweet moment. So this has been an interesting week working on our new building. So you're probably aware, if you're not, we have this new building just down the street that's kind of been given to us. It's this amazing story of God's provision. And so we've come through the first stages where the city permits have all kind of happened. And now we are actively working with an architect. So we've got an architect who's doing the work for us pro bono, but we're having to hire some engineers. So all great stuff. So I met with some engineers this week. We walked around the building. And so we've hit one of our first sort of speed bumps. The mechanical engineer looked at our rooftop units and said, "Oh, well, if we're going to have a church inside this office building, you don't have enough outside air. And so the units you have are not set up for that. And so we're going to have to come up with some kind of creative solution to bring more outside fresh air into the space." It's just one of those frustrating, like, heart in your throat kind of moments. It's not impossible. It's just going to mean more time and more money. And then I thought about it. I mean, I was kind of frustrated. I was like, can we just please just meet here? Let's tear down some walls and meet here. But when I think about those engineers coming in, what I really wanted them to do was just to go, "Yes, sir, whatever you want, sir. Let's stamp your idea and your plan," right? That's what I wanted. I wanted it to be smooth and easy for them to just go like, "Yes, of course, here's the hoop, you can jump through it." But they're the expert, right? The mechanical engineer went to school to understand how airflow works. And I mean, even this morning, we're struggling with the fact that this building was not designed for an assembly space, and it's either too hot or too cold in here, right? And so he comes into the building and says, "You don't have enough fresh air, this is not going to work." And so we need the engineers to be the experts to tell us what we have to do. Who am I? I don't know anything. And so it shouldn't surprise me when I have to go, "Okay, yeah, you're the expert. I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to do what you say." I feel like it's often how we also approach God. We're like, I just want God to do the things that I want to do. Right? I just want him to pave the road and make the path that I want to follow easier. I want him to clear the way, make it easier. I want me to bless me. I want him to forgive me, and I want him to sort of seal my destiny in heaven. I don't want him to get in the way or tell me to stop or start doing something. I don't want him to put obstacles or roadblocks or make this more difficult. I just want him to say, "Yes, sir," and do what I want. And Jesus is going to confront us here this morning with that kind of thinking. So we're going to dive back into the Gospel of Luke. Luke is the story, the eyewitness account that Luke has recorded of Jesus. We spent about 7 or 8 weeks in the first part of Luke already. So we've seen Jesus' birth. We've seen John the Baptist's miraculous birth. Jesus has begun sort of his ministry by overcoming temptation in the desert. He was baptized. The Spirit came down and said, "This is my beloved Son," this voice from heaven proclaiming Jesus. And then Jesus goes back into his hometown, and he goes to church on a Sabbath. And he starts reading from Scripture, and he's reading the scroll of Isaiah. And the scroll says, "The Spirit is on me to preach good news to the poor, to liberty to the captives, and sight to the blind. This is the time of the Lord's favor." And he closes the book, the scroll. He's saying all of this Old Testament stuff that we've been waiting for, all of the prophecies, all of the symbols, all of the work, all of the waiting. Jesus stands up in his hometown synagogue, and he says, "Now is the time. It's about me." That's where we pick it up in Luke chapter 4, starting in verse 22. "And all spoke well of him." Remember, this is Jesus. This is a tiny town, maybe a couple of hundred people tops in Nazareth. Tiny little town, his hometown synagogue. "And all people spoke well of him and marveled at the gracious words that were coming from his mouth. And they said, 'Is this not Joseph's son?'" Jesus was the son of a carpenter, a simple, humble, poor carpenter. And Jesus gets up in church and he starts preaching. People are shocked. Wait, who is this kid? And he said to them, and this is Jesus, doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, Physician, heal yourself. What we have heard you did at Capernaum, do here in your hometown as well. The Gospel of John has this other story that's happened in the meantime, but leading up to this, where Jesus goes to this wedding feast. And his mom says, hey, they've run out of wine, Jesus. And Jesus says, my time's not here yet. And his mom says, no, yes, it is. Make this happen. And so Jesus takes this water, the ceremonial water. This is amazing, the depth of what's going on in the story. He takes the ceremonial cleansing water in these pitchers, and he turns it into wine, and not just like terrible boxed wine. It's like really good wine. And it's the symbol that Jesus is taking what is old and he's making it new and he's making it better and he's bringing joy to the festival. He's taking that which was ceremonial and religious and he's making it relational and celebratory. And so his hometown has heard stories of this. And maybe they're just waiting like, Jesus, when's the wine coming? Like, hey, come on, Jesus, like make with the wine. Like, oh, hey, there's some water. It just so happened to be filled up fresh this morning, Jesus. Jesus is expecting this from them. Verse 24, and he said, truly I say to you, no prophet is acceptable in his hometown. It's kind of that like familiarity breeds contempt. They don't argue, they don't accuse Jesus of hidden sin. I think they just look at his humble life and it doesn't fit with their expectations of God. He's a carpenter's son, he's a nobody. Yeah, he's a great kid. No one has any complaints and apparently there's these things that he's able to do. But their expectation is that when the Messiah comes, when God works, it's going to be this amazing, huge, powerful, mighty work. That it's going to be military, and it's going to be pomp and ceremony, and there's going to be power and strength and glory, and there's Jesus, Joseph's son. Jesus doesn't fit their expectation. But in truth, I tell you, there were many widows in Israel, and in the days of Elijah, when the heavens were shut up at 3 years and 6 months, and a great famine came over all the land, and Elijah sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to the woman who was a widow. And Jesus tells them a story. He knows their expectations. In some ways, he's provoking them here. He says, I know what you want from me. I know that you want me to work miracles. He says, let me tell you a little story. He says, back in the days of Israel, back in the Old Testament, there was a famine. There was a drought. And the prophet Elijah wasn't sent to the powerful women of Israel. He was sent to a Gentile widow. And he performed this mighty work amongst the Gentile widow and not amongst his own people. He's telling the story, and maybe it's stirring up some frustration. Like, what are you saying? And then Jesus doubles down. And he says, and there were many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, but none of them were cleansed, but only Naaman, the Syrian. He's also telling the story of like all the Israelite lepers, all God's people, right? They're suffering, but instead Elisha goes and he heals a Gentile, a foreigner. And I think what Jesus is trying to say to them is that they are not entitled to God. They have these expectations on how God has to work, what God has to do, and if they claim it, then it has to happen. And Jesus is, no. Look at the history of Israel. This is not how God works, and this is not how I am working right now. I am not going to meet your expectations. And when they heard these things, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath. This turned quickly on Jesus. And I think he's actually kind of baiting them into this. He's provoking them to expose where their hearts really were. That if you're not going to fulfill our expectations, we have no use for you, Jesus. You won't do tricks like you did in a rival city. And you're claiming that God, cares about the Gentiles more than about us? And they rose up and they drove him out of town and brought him to the brow of a hill on which their town was built so that they could throw him down the cliff. But pressing through their midst, he went away. Now, whether or not this was sort of the town trying to provoke him and force his hands, and Jesus called their bluff, or actually there's miraculous sort of stilling of the crowd. Either way, they come to this edge of a cliff, and instead of pushing Jesus down, he just walks right through them, and he leaves. And from what we can tell, it looks like Jesus never goes home to Nazareth again. Verse 31. And he went down to Capernaum. This was another city a little farther away, also on the Sea of Galilee, a bigger city. He had been there before. And he was teaching them on the Sabbath, and they were astonished at his teaching, for his word possessed authority. In that day and age, the scribes would have been teaching usually in the synagogues, and their teaching was known to be dry and also kind of corrupt. And they usually would just repeat each other's ideas. They never really came up with a new idea. And so Jesus comes in preaching something fresh, something loving, something vibrant, and they're astonished, that there's this new teaching in the church, but also that it's coming from this carpenter's son. And in the synagogue, there was a man who had a spirit of an unclean demon, and he cried out with a loud voice, "Ha! What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." So someone in the midst in this crowd in church shouts back. We're told that it's someone possessed by a demon who shouts back, "I know who you are," and he says, "You are the Son of God." And the irony is that it's the demon who knows who Jesus is here. We're told in James, in the letter that James wrote, in 2:19, he said that the demons, they understand that there's one God, that God is one. They believe it and they shudder. And so there's belief and there's understanding here, but right belief doesn't necessarily mean right allegiance. But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And when the demon had thrown him down in their midst, he came out of him, having done him no harm. So Jesus rebukes this demon. The demon leaves the guy. He falls on the ground. And also, it's interesting, Luke, the physician, makes a special note to say that, and the guy wasn't hurt. He cares about the guy's well-being here. And they were all amazed and said to one another, "What is this word? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and they come out." And reports about him went into every place in the surrounding region. Again, the irony, who is this guy? Who is this guy? The demon just said who he was. But the crowd in Capernaum, they don't really believe. They don't understand yet. And he arose and left the synagogue and entered Simon's house. Now Simon's mother-in-law was ill with a high fever, and they appealed to him on her behalf. Simon, that's Simon Peter, the Apostle Peter. He goes to his house, and his mother-in-law is sick. Insert whatever mother-in-law joke you want here. Apparently, Peter cares for his mother-in-law and tells Jesus that she's sick. And then just go, "Let's go somewhere else." So he tells him about the fever. And he stood over her, that's Jesus, and rebuked the fever, and it left her. And immediately she rose and began to serve them. Earlier, he rebukes the demon. Here, he rebukes an illness, and it shows, I think Luke is showing, that Jesus has authority over the broken parts of the spiritual realm, and he also has authority over the broken parts of the physical world. And then it's also interesting, you kind of get this feel for her character. She's sick, right? She's had this fever. She's sweaty. She's gross. He rebukes the fever. She instantly gets better, and she's just trying to comb her hair. And she's like, "Let me make you something to eat," right? She instantly goes down. She's trying to make them some food. She's serving them. "Oh, the house is a mess," right? She instantly, that's the way that she worships is by serving. So she instantly starts to serve them. And now when the sun was setting, all those who were sick with various diseases brought them to him, and he laid his hands on every one of them and healed them. The Sabbath ended, the Sabbath day where you weren't allowed to do any work, ended at sundown. And so kind of what this verse is telling us is everyone in town is hearing what is going on. They're hearing about this demon. They're also hearing about Simon's mother-in-law and this healing. And so they're literally watching the clock. They're watching the sun. And the moment the sun goes down, "Let's go!" And they grab everybody who's sick, everybody's hurting, and they sprint to Jesus. They're just waiting out the clock, and the moment the sun goes down, they're headed to Jesus in faith with all of these broken people. And Jesus laid hands on every one of them and healed them. He probably could have done it with a word, a command. There's different ways that Jesus heals throughout the Gospels, but here it seems like he spends time laying hands on each and every one of them. He takes his time. He meets with people individually. He hears their story. He cares about each and every individual. He spends time and he's healing them. And demons also came out of many crying, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak because they knew that he was the Christ. We see Jesus do this regularly, where he says, hey, be quiet about this, okay? He's trying to slowly build a movement where he's able to teach and share God's heart and to be able to inaugurate this kingdom that's going to be a movement. And if people get too excited about the healings and the miracles, it could turn into a revolt and they could try and make him king. And Jesus knows that his popularity is going to lead to the cross. He knows that people aren't going to sit well with it. He wants to slow it down. He wants to meet with more people. He wants to spend more time teaching and sharing God's heart and sharing about the kingdom. And so he wants people to just be quiet, keep it to yourself, and slowly build this movement without it going out of control. And when it was day, he departed and went to a desolate place, and the people sought him, and he came to him and would have kept him from leaving. And so we end this here. We see the people don't want Jesus to leave. Please stay here in Capernaum. But he said to them, I must preach the good news of the kingdom of God to other towns as well, for I was sent for this purpose. And he was preaching in the synagogues of Judea. And so we have this contrast. I think that Luke is intentionally setting up for us, where Jesus is driven out of his hometown, but in Capernaum they won't let him leave. And Jesus says, I'm not here to stay. I'm not here for you. This is about, and what we're going to see over and over again in the Gospel of Luke, is the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is what I'm here to be about, not about to heal the diseases in one village. I'm here to proclaim and deliver and inaugurate the kingdom of God, God's reign and God's rule in the world. It's this greater purpose that Jesus is God. And so, what we see here in Luke 4 is there's three different responses, three different groups who respond to Jesus in different ways. The first group we see his hometown. They reject Jesus because he doesn't meet their expectations. They have this understanding of A, what a local kid can do, and B, and also B, who God is, and when God shows up as the Messiah, what that's going to look like. They thought it was going to involve military parades and power and might, and Jesus didn't meet their expectation. He also didn't meet their expectation that God was going to show up and obviously just serve them and honor them because they were his people. And Jesus doesn't meet that expectation, so they reject him. They push him away. So there's the rejection when Jesus doesn't meet expectations. The second response to Jesus is that of the demons. They know who he is. They acknowledge correct information and theology. But there isn't an allegiance. They don't bow their knee. They can know who God is without being in relationship or loving him. They refuse to bow. And then the third group is those in Capernaum who think that Jesus is kind of like their genie. We just got to keep him here, our own little miracle worker. He'll heal our diseases. He'll bring us some food. He'll make us some wine. We got to keep him here because God is supposed to serve us. But Jesus doesn't fit into any of these paradigms. Jesus doesn't, in fact, with the first group, he kind of provokes them. With the second group, he rebukes them. And with the third group, he leaves them. He departs. Because Jesus will not compromise who he is to meet our expectations. Jesus is about building his kingdom and not ours. Listen, I think we naturally assume that we're the center of the universe. Even if we're like, oh, well, no, not me. No, we do. Right? When we look at our perspective, when we look at the voice in our head, when we look at our story, ours is the only one we really know. And so therefore, it's natural. Mine is the most important story. Sorry to break it to you. And you all are secondary characters in my story. And if you help my story, then you're an ally. And if you oppose my story, then you're an enemy. Because I'm building my little kingdom, right? And I think that's naturally how we think. That's the interesting thing, right? When you're on a sports team as a kid, right? Those people on your team, they're your allies, and everybody who's on a different team, they're your enemies, right? And you hate them because they're getting in the way of what you want. But then the next season rolls around, and you're playing baseball again, and those same people who were your enemies are now on your team, and you have this conflict. You're like, oh, I guess I like you now, right? It's this perspective of I am at the center of the universe. But God will not just become an accessory to our little stories. Up until the year 1500, everyone knew that the earth was at the center of the universe. It's called a geocentric worldview, right? Obviously, this is our planet. Obviously, God made it. So therefore, we are at the center of the universe, and everything else, including the sun, it all revolves around the earth. Then Copernicus comes along in 1500 and discovers, oh, actually, it's the sun that's at the center of the universe. And you know what? Actually, when we come to understand the size and the scope and the power of the sun, the earth is pretty insignificant. Especially now, when we truly understand the universe, or even just with the finite ability in our minds, the earth is insignificant. I mean, it's important to us because it's our home, but like in the grand scheme of things, this little sphere is pretty small and insignificant. There's something, like 93 million Earths can fit into the size of the sun? Like, it's crazy. And so this geocentric worldview where the earth is at the center of the universe was smashed. We're like, no, actually, we orbit the sun. It's a heliocentric worldview, and we're actually a pretty small deal in the grand scheme of things. And for us, I think what Jesus confronts here in Luke 4 and all through the Bible is it confronts this view that we have that I am at the center of the universe. It is my story that is the most important. And we need this Copernican shift in our lives to realize that no. That my life, my time is pretty insignificant. The Bible calls us dust and vapor. We're here today, gone tomorrow. We're like the grass in the field that grows and then withers. And we are not the central piece of God's story. Instead, we need to reorient our lives so that we orbit Jesus. And he's inviting us. There's this call and this invitation that God is inviting us into his larger story, into his kingdom. That we naturally want to build our own little broken kingdoms. And the invitation of Jesus is to lay those down, to surrender those, to bow our knee to the King, and become a part of this larger story, this larger kingdom that's going on. It's an invitation to something bigger than us that isn't about us. And the story here, these three responses to Jesus in Luke 4, they're not just their responses. If we're honest, they're our responses. Because there are times, like Nazareth, where Jesus doesn't meet our expectations. Just read the Old Testament. It's all over the place. We're like, I wouldn't do that. I don't understand that. That's not how I would function, God. That's not what I would do. In our lives, there are often times when Jesus won't meet our expectations, and especially when we want something, and Jesus says no. Either no, it's not a possibility, and I've shut that door, or no, you can't have that because it's sin, and it's destructive, and I say no. And so what do? When Jesus doesn't meet our expectations, we keep him at arm's length. We go like, hey, I'll take some of that blood, Jesus, but no. You can go outside. We reject him when he doesn't meet our expectations or serve our stories, just like Nazareth. And then sometimes, it sounds harsh, but I think it's what the text is setting up, that sometimes we're maybe a little more like the demons than we care to admit, where we have a correct head knowledge of God. We've got our theology straight. We've gone to the Bible studies. We know who he is. But have we surrendered to him? Have we actually bowed our knee in allegiance and said, you're king? That it's not about me building my little story and others orbiting me, that I need to surrender everything and bow my knee to the king and turn my life to him. There are a lot of North American Christians who know a lot about Jesus, but have never bowed their knee to the king in submission. Again, like, I want fire insurance, God. I want my get out of jail free card, but don't tell me how to live my life. And then the third response, I think is becoming more and more common, is that we just want to use him. We have this expectation that, God, you owe me, and you got to do the things I want you to do, and how dare you not do those things? I want health, I want wealth, I want prosperity, I want ease and comfort. And we expect God just to do those things and to be like our little pocket genie. But the reality is that God is calling us into his kingdom, into his purposes, and sometimes my purposes might actually be opposed to his. And there are times when God is going to say, no, that's not what I have for you. Stop asking. Stop whining about it. I mean, honestly, when we look back in the last year, I guess like a year and a half ago, when our whole visa situation happened and we got denied at the border and deported and all of that fun stuff, I remember months, literally 4 months of just beating my head against the wall, being like, God, why won't you just do this? Just make this happen. Being so frustrated that God wouldn't just do what I wanted him to do. And so many people were praying. So many of you were praying. God, why don't you just make this happen? And I look back now and it's because you were trying to do something different and you needed that roadblock and you needed the pain of that season in order to force us to this place where we are now. And I actually look back now and go, I'm so thankful that you didn't just do things my way. Because it's the shift of going, it's about me and my plan and my way and my comfort and my stuff, to actually going, no, Jesus, I'm bowing my knee to you because I want your way and your plan. His mission is bigger than their expectations. It's bigger than our expectations because his kingdom doesn't revolve around us. The call is to lay down control and maybe even to let go of the version of Jesus that we often create in our minds. He just loves me like a doting grandfather, and so whatever I want, he wants to give me. And whatever I love, he obviously loves because he loves me, and so therefore it's good. And so we've got these faulty expectations of Jesus because we still think that we are at the center of his orbit, that we are the apple of his eye, that we are all he cares about. And we see Jesus leaving these groups going, no, I'm building something bigger than you. Are you coming with me? And are you going to be a part of this larger kingdom movement? Or are you going to stay here and try and do your own little thing? Because I'm not going to stay and be a part of that. And that feels harsh. But I come back to, time and time again, when Jesus says, hey, lay down your life, pick up your cross, and follow me. Stop trying to build your own little kingdoms and stop expecting me to just give you all these things so you can have this happy, wealthy, retirement, comfortable life with, this perfect family. When God says, no, you need to surrender that, he's not just calling us to suffer. He's not just calling us to flagellate ourselves and to live in pain and suffer. He's actually calling us to follow him because he knows what life is intended to be, because he designed it. Going back to the illustration, tying it all in, he's the engineer. He made it all. He's the expert. Who are we? When God says, lay down your cross, lay down those things, pick up your cross, follow me. He wants to lead us into life, into fullness of life, into purpose and mission. Will you do it? Is there anything in your life right now? Think about a plan. Is there a plan in your life? Is there a plan for your future? A vision for what your little kingdom is going to look like? Is there anything in your life? Is there any of your stuff? Is there anything you own, anything you have or want to have? Or is there any relationship? Is there any person that if God this morning was to tell you, you need to lay that down? You need to walk away from that. I've got something different for you. Is there anything that you would not be willing to surrender? Because it exposes our heart in those things. Is there anything that you love more than you love Jesus? Then it's us trying to build our own little kingdom. And we're not actually submitting to him, trusting him. He's inviting you into his kingdom, into his life. Will you trust him more than you trust yourself? Let's pray.